if shame worked, we wouldn't have this problem, right? If it
Yeah.
worked and was a great motivator, we'd not,
Right.
no,
Right.
it would have solved this problem a long time ago.
So, welcome to Thrive While Loving an Addict. And I am super excited today to have Duane Osterlind as a guest on my podcast. I was a guest on his podcast in July of 2021, which seems like yesterday, and yet it seems so long ago. And he is just a very heart-centered, compassionate, kind man in the world doing big work to help those of us who deal with shame and addiction of all kinds. And how do we lay the shame down, the silence down to get the help that we really truly need, whether we're on the addiction side or whether we're actually on the loved one side. And so I just want to thank you, Duane, for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here. And I can't believe it. It's been so much time, goes by so fast. It's like, oh
I
my gosh, how did that happen?
Really, truly. So I want you to start with your own story as a teenager, and
Sure.
how you kind of entered the world of addiction. What was the kind of the needle mover for you in that direction? And then what was the thing that changed your life?
Oh boy, those are like big questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I was, when I was 17, I went into rehab. I struggled with, I think looking back now, more than the alcohol itself and the addiction itself, was more dealing with depression and anxiety and shame and not knowing how to cope with that and not knowing how to deal with that. And for me at that time in my life, using alcohol as a way to cope, to soothe that over, to deal with it. And lucky enough for me, I had some people around me that cared about me enough to help me get help when I needed it and get that support. And I'm incredibly
Mm-hmm.
grateful to that because as a young person at 17, and when your brain is in such primal development,
Yeah.
I was able to get away from that. And I realize now, looking back as I'm older, it
Mm-hmm.
gave my brain time to heal and time to develop the coping mechanisms I needed to deal with some of the issues I was facing. Now, later in my life, these issues often, as they do, they come back in different ways, but
Yeah.
in a much healthier fashion of dealing with them and dealing with whatever the traumas were there for me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think it was really helpful. And that was a profound experience for me going
Mm-hmm.
into that as a 17-year-old, going into inpatient, going into groups, going into all of that stuff. I mean, it was pretty overwhelming when I look at it, but I needed that at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of gratitude around that. And I didn't get into the helping profession until my 30s. I
Mm-hmm.
completely did something else. And this kind of came all back around to me to getting into the helping profession. And
Was
it's
there
been,
something that happened that made you step out of the film industry and into the helping profession?
there wasn't any particular one thing, but what I
Okay.
found was as I started to listen to myself and getting a little older, I really wasn't happy with what I was doing. It was like I thought this was what I was supposed to do, or I
Mm,
thought this is what I wanted to do. And going back to your old trauma, the film industry, it's exciting and it's fun and it's got all these accolades around it and stuff like that. And you feel special when you're on the movie sets and all that kind of stuff, right? But
mm-hmm.
I really wasn't happy. I worked as a camera assistant. I was in the camera department and I loved that stuff, but I wasn't really wired for it. And I was on I think it was a music video. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I tripped. I broke my leg. I couldn't work. I had
Oh,
disability at the time. And so, because I tripped over a cable, I was running to do something on the set and I tripped and I broke my ankle and I couldn't work. And it was the middle of the summer. And I just thought, I've always been interested in psychology. Maybe I'm not one to just sit
hmm,
around and do nothing.
hmm,
And so I met with the dean, the department at Cal State Long Beach, and his name was Vince. He was an incredible man. And he talked to me for about an hour and he said, I have this class on Saturday. It's 6 weeks. It's on the weekends. Why don't you join in? Why don't you just join it? He goes, I
mm-hmm.
can fit you in, even though it starts this weekend. Everybody signed up. I'll get you in. I'm like, okay, I got 6 weeks of disability. The class is 6 weeks. Perfect. All right, I'll just do it. It's on the weekends and I can hobble over there and do it. So I did it and I just kind of fell in love with it. And then it took about 2 years of like, okay, I'm going to take the next class. I'm going to take the next class. And then finally, there was this moment where I said, I'm letting that old life go. And I remember that moment because I had a friend who was shooting a film and a really good friend, and he asked me, he says, I want you to do the photography for it. And I was like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for, right? This is
Hmm.
it. I get to shoot a big feature film. And I turned it down. And I think it was a really good decision. And I think the other friend I had who actually did it is excellent. So it really worked
Hmm.
out. But for me, that was that transition. And then I really committed myself to this work and pursued it from there. And I mean, I think people get into the helping profession because they're really trying to help themselves and trying
Hmm.
to figure out their own
Hmm.
life. And that
Yeah.
was the same case for me as I did this work. I was really trying to know me and trying
Hmm.
to learn about me as I did this. And I've been doing that ever since. And I'm just grateful for it. I'm incredibly
Hmm.
grateful that I had those opportunities to do that. And I love what I'm doing. I love it.
Hmm.
It's my passion. And I love seeing people when they come their best self and you see it in them. And it's just like, it's such a rewarding experience to see people get to the other side and finally
Hmm.
find a place where they feel good. It doesn't mean that life isn't hard, doesn't mean that hardships don't show up,
Right.
but they feel good about where they are. And I love seeing that. And I love people
Hmm.
knowing that that's a possibility for them.
Well, clearly you can see your eyes start to sparkle when you start to talk about this, which is awesome. And I'm also struck by the synchronicity of what took place and that you paused enough to hear that kind of silent calling of
Hmm.
interest and then took the next step. And so for our audience, I think the being aware that kind of the universe or life or whatever is kind of showing up for you to
Yeah.
be open to
And it
what
was
might
still
be possible.
scary at this. I just
Mhm.
want to say it's still scary at the same time. I
Mhm.
didn't know what was going to happen. And I also,
Mhm.
I'll tell another story here just to kind of frame this out. I
Yeah.
remember I'd done all this work, I had done that, and I got into this place and I was meeting with this gentleman and I had gotten my license as a therapist and I was moving forward and I was about to get licensed and this guy said, "Oh, why don't you meet with me and kind of show you the ropes?" And so I'm like thinking, "Oh, maybe I'm going to get a job here, maybe I'm going to do everything." And I meet with this gentleman and unfortunately, what's the other experience? He told me how awful it was. How all
Oh.
and like this is all you do is you treat charts and I don't know where he was working. He was working at a place I guess he didn't enjoy. And I remember walking away from that meeting feeling like, have I just messed up? Have I chosen the wrong
Oh.
path? And it was hard, right? I'm like, oh my gosh. So you swing in and out of these different things and they come in different ways in your life. And that was really, really difficult. And I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe I should go back. Maybe I'm not going to be able to make a living in this. Maybe all of this
Mhm.
stuff. And
Mhm.
lucky enough, I met another person
Mhm.
that was the opposite of that as I
Mhm.
who helped me along and I started this journey and pulled me through that. So it's interesting how we can kind of go through those ups and downs. It's not ever a clear path. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, I made this decision and then it was all
Right.
rainbows. It wasn't. It was hard, but
Yeah.
because I want people to understand like sometimes it's not always clear but if we're open, I always find people keep showing up that help you along.
Yeah, and I think that is a pivotal thing for those of us who love people that are dealing with addiction. And we're going to get into this is we tend to keep ourselves isolated. And I talk to more women that are willing to have a conversation with me about loving someone, whether it's a child or a spouse or a parent or whatever that is, than I talk to men. And my experience has been that men tend to isolate up behind the wall of shame. And I think if anybody I'd want to have that conversation with, it would be you, Duane.
Oh, thank you. That's one of the things that really breaks my heart. I mean, I work with a lot of men and I work with a lot of men in addiction, and I work particularly with men who are struggling with sex and porn addiction, a very, very specific addiction that has a ton of shame in it. And, I run groups and I can tell you these men, they come in and they're overwhelmed with shame and
Mm-hmm.
they are overwhelmed with isolation. That's the other
Mm-hmm.
piece. And then finally, there's this safe space where they can begin to kind of open up a little bit. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes, the feedback I get after they're in these groups is like, these are the most meaningful relationships I've ever had in my life. I've never had any kind of intimate relationship with another man anywhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the loneliness of it
Mm-hmm.
all, it's gut wrenching because men oftentimes get stuck in that man box thinking where it's like, if I show any vulnerability, if I show any kind of emotional experience, I'm going to be weak. I'm going to be perceived
Mm-hmm.
as inadequate. And so, from an early age, boys are taught to pull that inward and isolate. And you're supposed to be stoic. You know, the male heroes are these stoic men
Mm-hmm.
that have no emotional expression. And
Mm-hmm.
you see it in movies all the time, right?
Right.
It's
Mm-hmm.
this man goes through this tragic experience and he's allowed to shed maybe one tear. That'll be allowed, but nothing more, right? And he can't
Mm-hmm.
talk about it and he just has to have that stoic. And that's what we praise as being masculine. And what ends up happening is men end up trapped because you can't have relationships if you're not vulnerable. You can't
Right.
have relationships if you don't have emotional expression. So these men in my group, as they finally express emotions and other men express their emotions, they're like, oh my gosh, it opens up this whole world to them. And that's amazing to see.
Just the notion of, I call it holding space. And for me, I think the simplest explanation is I see you, I hear you, I love you. And for men and women, for all of us, honestly, to have that kind of safety and space with no judgment and none of the stuff that keeps us trapped, to let it all, the mask, lay it aside and really tell our truth is an incredibly life-changing, powerful experience. And so thank you for doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah. And I'd also add to this too, as you're talking, I'm thinking about this. It's also the internalized shame of doing
Mm-hmm.
that. In some ways, it's like let go of the mask, let go of that, show up, be yourself, and all of that. But they have to do that internally because the shame comes in and tells us, because shame is this social construct emotion, right? We feel shame in context of others, right?
Yes.
Says do not express that. Do not even express that to yourself, because
Mm-hmm.
if you do, if you experience that internally, you are
Mm-hmm.
unworthy. So don't do it,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so they have to do it internally. They have to walk through that internally. And then they also have to walk through it externally. And it can be incredibly challenging to do that because a lot of those thoughts are so ingrained from early childhood that
Yeah.
we don't even realize we've made the calculation and it's already taking place and we're getting more and more isolated. I mean, that's why male suicide is at an extremely high rate in older men because they're living alone and it breaks my heart.
Yeah. Before we got on, we were talking about paradigms. And I think lots of times we're not even aware of the paradigm or the mindset that is controlling us.
Yeah.
And so, how I hear what you're saying, Duane, is that really this is kind of the pattern interrupt in a paradigm of thinking, that we have to be aware that the shame track that we were taught really as kids, and our families, our communities, our schools, all of the things, we have to really like shatter that and start over.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think the first part is being able to recognize that. One of the things I love, I don't know if you've heard of any of Donald Matherson's work. It's great. He did a lot of work on shame. And one of the things that he came up with, what's called the shame compass.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times, what we can do when we're struggling with shame, and this is not for men, this is for anybody, right?
Yeah.
Is
Mm-hmm.
understand how that behavior shows up. It shows up behaviorally, so we can begin to recognize it. And then as we begin to recognize it, we can start to do something with that. And at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, having that environment that allows that exploration. That's where
Mm-hmm.
groups come in, supportive communities come in, right? But first,
Yeah.
understanding, oh, this is actually what's happening to me, bringing some awareness to that.
Mm-hmm.
And we can do that with a tool like the Shame Compass. And I can go over that if you want because it can be really, really helpful to see, oh, that's how I manifest this.
Yeah, I've not heard that term before or of his work. So if you would give us a little bit more of a window in, I would love that, because how I hear that is the exploration is coming through almost observing our own behavior. And we're like,
Yeah.
wow, that's not working for me. Okay, now what?
Yeah, what do I do with this? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, because once again, shame is this really extremely powerful emotion, probably the most powerful emotion we can feel. And shame also shuts down all other emotions. And we want to not experience shame at all costs, because if you think about it, shame is this emotion that says, I am not worthy of being a part of the tribe, the
Mm,
group, right?
right.
In our primal history, if you were not part of the tribe or group or
Yeah.
anything like that, and you were cast out, that probably meant you weren't going to make it. You
Mm-hmm.
weren't going to be alive. You can't survive on your own. We're
Mm-hmm.
social animals. So when we feel like we are unworthy, right? When we get shame that says we, and we could talk about this as like toxic shame, when it's
Yeah.
shame is fused with our identity,
Mm-hmm.
then we're like, I cannot share myself because I
Yeah.
will be
Wow.
cast out, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
how do I defend against that? How do I internally push that away? And that's like you said, the mask, that's, one way of coping. But when you look at the shame compass and when you see it, it's like 4 points on a compass, right? And so there's
Mm-hmm.
four choices here. One is the top, if you want to look at north, the way I look at it, it's withdrawal. I'll withdraw from the situation so I won't experience shame, right? I'll
Mm-hmm.
I'll
Mm-hmm.
withdraw. I'll something happens in front of me and it signifies shame in an experience. You're in a group of people, something happens, and you just go silent, you go quiet, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
one way you're
Mm-hmm.
probably feeling shame. And
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to kind of push that shame away and not experience it. If we go south, the other is avoidance, right? I'm just
Mm-hmm.
not going to put myself in a situation
Mm-hmm.
where I might experience shame. So I just won't
Mm-hmm.
talk about it. Talk about men, and we were talking about earlier going into a group. I'm going to avoid that because if I actually have to go into a group and talk about something, oh my gosh, I'm probably going to experience shame. Not going to do it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
avoidance, I will avoid something. I'll avoid hard conversations. If it's shameful to be vulnerable, I'm not going to do it. Right. I'm going to avoid it. Then on the other side, if you look at East, it's attack self. Right.
Oh,
So this
okay.
is where, yeah, I am a rotten person. I am
Oh.
horrible. I can defend myself. It's almost like I can say it to myself first. I think of some of those comedians out there that struggled with addiction and
Mm-hmm.
were had a lot of self-deprecating humor, right? Under that humor is
Mm-hmm.
probably a lot of shame, and it was a way to defend against that shame. I can
Mm-hmm.
attack myself, I can do it on myself, and I'm in control and I don't have to experience the shame. If you actually came to me and said what I think you're going to say or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I won't do it. And then the other side of that is attack other. So this is
Mm-hmm.
where anger, rage comes out, right?
Yeah.
And we can see
Yeah.
that a lot in the world today. There's
Right.
a lot of shame. I'm going to attack you so that I can defend against that shame. So you can't shame me. I'm going to lash out at you. And this can lead all the way up to extreme violence or emotional abuse, all those kind of things. So you can
Right.
see that. So shame is a really powerful emotion that pushes us in these different directions. And having an awareness of that, we can do something different, right? And speak the shame, talk about the vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
with people who deserve that, right? Earned the
Yes.
privilege of that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't
Yes.
share everybody because,
Right.
some people aren't worthy. Some people can't handle the shame. Your shame will trigger their shame and they'll fall
Mm-hmm.
somewhere on this shame compass themselves. So you got to
Mm-hmm.
find people out there that can walk with you through that and have done their own shame work. And there's people
Mm-hmm.
out there.
Yeah, and wow. Okay, that's big. All four of those. So what I'm thinking about is the underlying thing, which all of us, I think it's just part of the human condition, is this notion of not being worthy, not mattering, not being of value. And so is from your experience and perspective, we all deal with that. Is shame tend to be the capsule that keeps us in that place?
I think so. When we think about this, we all experience shame, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's experience shame is a normal human emotion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's different ways of looking at this. There's healthy shame. Healthy shame also can be a container around our behavior. So we want to go do something. It's not good for the tribe. We feel a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of shame. We stop. We don't
Mm-hmm.
do it, right? Where shame becomes toxic is when it gets fused with our identity. I am shameful. I am broken. I am this feeling,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we experience ourselves
Mm-hmm.
emotionally. And if our primary experience is this emotion of shame, it's saying you're not worthy, you're wrong, you're broken, don't do that, don't be yourself, right? So
Yeah.
you're trapped in that. And usually, what I see, it comes from our early wounding. So when we
Mm-hmm.
experience trauma, we experience attachment trauma, our primary caregivers are maybe bound in shame and they use shame as a primary motivator, right? That starts to
Yeah.
get fused with the identity, right? We start to feel that we're not worthy because we didn't grow up in a place with fairness and justice and the normal experience of humanity, of the
Mm-hmm.
up and down, experience all our emotions. They start to use shame as a motivating force through abuse and trauma and such. And so that
Mm-hmm.
gets fused with the identity, and a person goes into their life trying to operate with that system in place.
Yeah.
And so in recovery and when you're working on this, it's a process of slowly undoing that.
I have a million things going on in my head. So let me grab one. So what I'm thinking about is that those of us who love someone who's dealing with addiction and dealing with our own shame around that. Like, when I witnessed my son's arrest and I told that story for the first time to people that I didn't necessarily know that well, I really had to do my own work internally first
Yeah.
to know that I was standing on solid ground
Hmm.
before I took the chance
Yeah.
to tell that story. And so, in a weird kind of way, I always think about the gifts and lessons and opportunities embedded in whatever we go through. And I have actually said this to my son. I am actually so grateful for his journey in addiction because it gave me the opportunity to do my work
Yeah.
and to get super clear about my value as a human and clear about what I wanted my life's purpose to be about and to wrestle with whatever shame I had left over.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think once again, it's like I've done something wrong. I'm a bad parent. I failed. I'm not worthy of being here. Instead of looking at your humanity and being able to own all the parts of it, the good
Mm-hmm.
parts, and being able to own our mistakes too with compassion and kindness, that this is part of being human, right? This is
Mm-hmm.
part of walking this path. And when you start to get to that centered space, you can share your story because you have the shame resilience to be able to do it and to
Mm-hmm.
walk through it
Mm-hmm.
and eventually turn that into compassion. When we're falling on the shame compass, as I was talking about earlier, using coping mechanisms to avoid a part of ourselves we don't want to understand, we don't want to know, it's too
Yeah.
painful. And so we actually can't work on it. Actually can't do the work to see what's on the other side of this, right? And to
Mm-hmm.
grow through it.
Yeah. And so therefore we're trapped.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think about is Sam's journey with addiction cracked me so wide open. I personally couldn't avoid any of the stuff I needed to deal with anymore.
Yeah. And I think that's the hard about shame, right?
Mm-hmm.
Usually what I see is something kind of has to happen, force our hand to have to look at this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
if someone's listening out there and they're thinking about that might be the clue, right? Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
maybe
Mm-hmm.
I have to jump into this a little bit more because something is so uncomfortable. It's not working. I'm not congruent with myself.
Yeah.
And so if I'm not congruent, I can feel I don't know if you want to call it the churn inside of me that
Yeah.
doesn't work. And I
Mhm.
go to these old behaviors because I'm just trying to defend.
Right. Right. Well, that's that chaos and disruptive stuff that's going on internally when we are like so off center, we don't know
Mhm.
how to get back to center. And I want to come back to what you said earlier, the shame resiliency. A lot of my work has to do with moving from crisis to thriving. And how do we actually thrive in the midst of the chaos and destruction and all the things around addiction? which I think is an opening. But so speak a little bit about shame resiliency.
Yeah, well, like I said, when we're going to experience shame, and it's an incredibly powerful emotion, and
Mm-hmm.
if shame has kind of been hijacked for us as an emotion that's dominating our experience for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason, our trauma, whatever, we have to be resilient to that emotion. And resilience is the ability to walk through that hardship and have the skills to do it, right? What I
Mm-hmm.
love
Mm-hmm.
about this is that this is stuff you can learn to do, right?
Yes.
It's not like I just change my thinking and then I understand it and wow, here I
Oh,
am. Wow, I understand it now. Understanding is just the first step, right?
right. Yeah.
Once you kind of understand it, then you've got to do the work, and that's an emotional journey because you have to do it in the experience. But you get the tools to walk through that, and that's resilience, to survive it and thrive even
Mm-hmm.
through the hardship of experiencing shame. And what I think about the emotion of shame, the way I describe it is it's a very sticky emotion to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if
Okay.
that describes it. Like when you think about anxiety, right? You can
Yeah.
have anxiety and you can experience it and you can do some deep breathing, you can do some box breathing, and it can kind of go away, right? You can
Right.
lower it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
When we tend to experience shame, we experience it, we feel it, and then it stays with us for a longer
Oh.
time. So it's
Hmm.
a little bit more, that's why I call it sticky. So when people have a
Hmm.
lot of shame and they fall into a shame attack,
Yeah.
right? Or a shame spiral, if you want to call it that, and they really
Yeah.
spiraling down in that deep
Mm-hmm.
shame, it's really hard to just do some breathing and shame goes away. It's more like you have to start to reach out. You have to sit with it. It's going to take a couple days to kind of
Mm-hmm.
move through that shame experience. So it's a little more challenging to handle the emotion of shame.
Yeah. So shame attack, never heard that terminology before. That's actually brilliant. And then I think of everything as a skill set to perfect. So everything that serves us, we didn't grow up knowing all of this stuff. And if we did know all of this stuff, we certainly got it shifted based on most of us in terms of the families, communities, schools we went to. But the fact that we can learn skills, I call it skilling up. And move in the direction of being able to be resilient and be in a thriving place and so on and so forth. So yes, amen to skilling up. I also think about the brain science piece of this. So when you have a shame attack, how I hear that is we're in our brainstem, which is fight, flight, or freeze. And so then it becomes an exercise, the way that I'm thinking about this, in moving us from here to up here in our neurocortex area, where we have access to what I would call the sage.
Right. And I think because we want to avoid shame, shame is this emotion, is, the master emotion. It tells us we're worthy to be part of the tribe, right? And we're going to be
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes you have all these other emotions that go along with it. So
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, I can't experience this I'm not worthy. I'm cast out. Oh my gosh, and so now you're in
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and you're in fight or flight. And so, you're pulling on all of these skills to walk through that, but underneath that core is that shame.
Yeah. And so how I hear that is that spiral of shame that you talked
Right.
about. So maybe shame is the thing. And then it also is joined by
Right, joined by all
anxiety and
these things.
depression and
Yeah, because I
uh,
don't want, oh my gosh, if I experience this, oh my gosh, oh, I can't. So there now it's like I'm afraid of experiencing shame, or
mm-hmm.
so I got to avoid it, or withdraw, or fall somewhere on the shame compass to deal with it,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
I'm anxious about it, or some people will go to depression. It's just not worth it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
worthless. I might as well. That's attack self, anger at the self, right? They'll move into depression because of it. Once again, I'm not worthy of being a part of it.
Yeah. So, for those who are listening to this that are trapped by shame in the midst of loving somebody who's dealing with substance use disorder, what are one, two, or three kind of needle movers to begin to crack through that shame and move a little bit more towards center, maybe?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question. That's what we want, right? How do we
Mm-hmm.
change this? How do we shift
Right.
this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we think about shame, it's a social construct emotion. It's in context of others, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we need other people to help us do this, right? We
Mm-hmm.
can do some of it on our own, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying we
Mm-hmm.
can regulate ourselves, we can do that. But really, when we really want to work on shame, we want other people around us, people that we can trust and can respond compassionately to us to change that experience. And there are people out there. I have a saying that we heal through the eyes of others,
Yes.
right? We need to speak our shame. This also comes out of Brene Brown's work, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Speak our shame and talk about it and find those supportive communities that can walk alongside you to help you work on it. If you really want to move shame, you have to do it with other people. The hard part is shame is telling us not to do it with other
Mm-hmm.
people, right? So we're getting this
Mm-hmm.
message that says, no, don't share that, right? Because you're not
Mm-hmm.
worthy. If you share
Mm-hmm.
that, everybody's going to kick you out. What you find when you're in communities that have walked through some of this shame,
Yeah.
we're all the
Mm-hmm.
same, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
all experiencing the same thing. We're all
Mm-hmm.
afraid, right? We all want to be loved. We all want to be cared for. We all want to be a part of. We all do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so finding those communities that can help you. And I would imagine for you, that was a big part of it in healing
Mm-hmm.
your trauma around being parent to your son and all of the shame that's like I didn't live up to what I was supposed to do or all the stuff you make up, right? And I wasn't worthy. And my guess found people that could walk with you through that.
Well, I was fortunate that I was older when the shit really hit the fan. I was in my early 60s and I already had two, three different tribes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and I leaned in big time. And
Mhm.
then I also did some sifting and sorting through those tribes too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I remember there was a friend of mine who said to me one day, "Does he not understand what he's doing to you?" That was like not even in
Whoa.
my
Yeah.
thinking. And I thought, wow, okay, that's her stuff. And so then I distanced myself because I realized the thinking and the mindset that I wanted to be living in was not that,
Right.
where I was blaming him or blaming myself or whatever that looked like in both directions. That was a actually failed strategy.
Right. So to be able to sit there with that, have other people give you that feedback, walk with you
Mm-hmm.
through it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then the other was just a couple of long friends that were super judgmental
Mhm.
about Sam's addiction.
Right.
And I was like, well, okay, that is not going to help me at all either, because where does blame get you? And then I was the one to blame because I was the parent.
Right.
Why can't you control him? Why can't you get him in rehab? Why can't you stop this? Why can't you fix him? All that comes with that, which I'm sure there are people listening to this right now that are experiencing that themselves.
And I think this comes into the next part of this equation, right? So we need others, right? We
Mm-hmm.
need to have other people in us. And then we need to change that relationship with ourselves. And this
Yes.
is where self compassion comes in. And we have to be compassionate to our humanity to change the relationship we have with ourselves around this process. And then
Mm-hmm.
that's its own journey. And that's another skill
Mm-hmm.
set that you can
Mm-hmm.
learn to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have this external world, right? But then you also have the internal. And
Right.
so you're doing both of those journeys together and they
Mm-hmm.
complement each other
Oh, that's
and
great. Yes.
and they work on each other because you're also slowly changing the relationship with yourself.
Right.
Also, changing that the shame relationship is because it's a felt sense, right? It takes
Mm-hmm.
time to change the nervous system around that. But when
Mm-hmm.
you have these positive experiences, these
Mm-hmm.
corrective experiences, so you're with a group and they can hold you in that space as you
Mm-hmm.
talk about
Mm-hmm.
your regret and your uncertainty and your shame around maybe I wasn't a good parent because I did this and this and this or whatever, right? And you're
Right. Mm-hmm.
spiraling in that and they can walk you and they can be in a way your humanity for you. You get that corrective experience, you
Mm-hmm.
change that dynamic, and then on your own, when you're struggling with this, you're practicing self-compassion,
Mm-hmm.
connecting yourself to your humanity, that as human beings this is how we struggle. may
Yeah.
may I find peace, may I find forgiveness. And now you're changing the relationship internally as well. So you're doing this on like both sides. And over time, that shifts, right? I wish that you could understand it and then just boom, it's done, right? Like that would
Yeah.
be so nice. But it's just, we just don't work that way. So we have to be
Right.
patient and
Yeah.
kind to ourselves. And we can't use
Yes.
shame. Shame is the way to try and heal. I've never seen anybody heal through shame, yet
Right.
we'll do it to ourselves all the time, right? We're
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
should have been stronger. I should be this. And we'll just shame ourselves trying
Mm.
to elicit some behavioral response that only gets us stuck back in the shame spiral and back into the shame compass and back
Mm-hmm.
into all these defensive behaviors that keep us stuck. So it really is, sitting with it and creating the opportunities for us to have these corrective experiences.
Yeah. And so it's a simultaneous work, the internal and the external. And
Hmm.
so when you lean into doing the internal work, your external will change also.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I talk about this in business in terms of if you have an aspiration for creating anything different than what you've created so far, guess who's got to change? And so the work for a lot of us is the internal work simultaneously doing the external work so they match up.
Yeah.
And that we can love ourselves and we can love others and we can have a community of love and support without judgment as a way of being in the world.
Yeah, as a way of being in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this journey with shame is an ongoing experience as we work and heal. New things will come up for us that maybe
Mm-hmm.
we've hidden in our
Mm-hmm.
life. And as we go
Mm-hmm.
through that, we have these experiences and like, oh my gosh, all of the shame is back. But as we build shame resilience, we know
Mm-hmm.
how to respond to it. And so we
Mm-hmm.
don't stay stuck in that shame spiral as long or as deep, and
Right.
we're able to walk ourselves through it much faster. And
Mm-hmm.
as we do that, we get better at it. We have more
Mm-hmm.
self-compassion as we do this journey.
Yeah. So might have taken you a week, takes you 5 days, and then takes you 3 days, and then takes you
Mhm.
one day, and then maybe
And then
takes you
sometimes you
10
can just go,
minutes.
oh, that's really interesting. I'm feeling a lot of shame. What's that about? Right. You can start
Right.
to recognize and
Exactly.
go, huh, what's going on here for me? Because I can feel
Yes.
it and I recognize it now,
Yeah.
and this is all this process of being able to slowly, like, start with like the shame compass, and then you can kind of see your behavior, and then you can
Mm-hmm.
move closer to how do I experience it in my body? Where do I feel it? What's
Mm-hmm.
happening? What are my,
Mm-hmm.
action urges to offend against the shame? And
Mm-hmm.
you slowly start that repair. And I think
Yeah.
everybody does better. If
Mm-hmm.
you have a loved one that is struggling with addiction
Mm-hmm.
and you're trying to use shame as the motivator to get them to change, it's not going to work. If you come with compassion and kindness, love and dignity, you got a much
Mm-hmm.
better shot at helping someone you care about and influencing them in a positive way. And the same with ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So I just believe that working through that makes everybody more, I don't want to say productive, but when they get to move in the way in which they want, that feels good for them, that
Mm-hmm.
thrives for them.
Yeah. Well,
And
I think lots of times, those of us who are parents or grandparents or whatever, if we're thinking shame is going to work, my experience has been my son was the master at shaming himself. And so he had it in spades compared to what I could do to him, so to speak. And so, because who he really is not that.
yeah,
And so the
yeah,
behaviors that he was doing in addiction mode were so counter to who he is as a human that he had his own shame thing going on. And
yeah,
so to recognize that, I think, as those of us, as a mom, to recognize that who Sam is really truly in his essence was got hijacked, honestly, by
yeah,
the addiction. And so I could then separate the two of them and love Sam,
yeah,
no matter what was happening with his addiction mode, with boundaries, of
yeah,
course. But I want our audience to really understand that whoever you love that's dealing with addiction or substance use disorder or any type of addiction, they're already shaming themselves like they're covered in shame.
right. I mean, I would just say if shame worked, we wouldn't have this problem, right? If it
Yeah.
worked and was a great motivator, we'd not
Right.
know
Right.
it would have solved this problem a long time ago. It doesn't
Right.
work,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yes.
It's like, all right,
Ah,
well,
shoot.
good luck.
Yeah.
And like I said, I've never seen anybody heal through shame. I just,
Mm-hmm.
nobody
Mm-hmm.
does because it's so
Yeah.
painful and it's so disconnecting and it's the antithesis of what we want as human beings. Although we need shame, it's a social construct
Mm-hmm.
emotion. We need healthy shame that tells us our limit and guides us. But this toxic shame that comes from trauma and is fused with the identity, we don't need that.
Right. Well, and I mean, my experience, my research so far, and listening to a lot of different people and talking to a lot of different people, is that trauma is kind of at the base of everything.
Yeah.
And so, if you see somebody who is dealing with addiction, you need to just drop right into the trauma that helped create that for them.
Yeah.
They went through something or some things, or
Yeah, or some beliefs that they got and then, with addiction too, you had the added on shame because the brain is not, a person struggling with addictions, they're not connected to their values anymore. Their brain is hijacked. And
yes,
so much of the time they're doing things against their own values, which
right.
leads more shame and they feel even worse. And they've got to hide from that feeling over and
Mm-hmm.
over and over again. And then
Yeah.
they've got this chemical dependency and it's just this feedback loop,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that, we can see the difference in the research around like interventions.
Mm-hmm.
The classic 12-step intervention was, in my opinion, very shame-based. We're going to hijack this person, we're going to tell them how horrible they are,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're going to get them into treatment. And most of those people didn't stay in treatment, they failed. When we
Right.
did it the reverse and we said, we care about you, we love you, these are all the wonderful things about you, we want you to get better, those
Mm-hmm.
people stayed in treatment so much longer and volunteered themselves for treatment because they want to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to be stuck in addiction. It's just, that's just a fallacy. But when we invite them with compassion and kindness and dignity and
Mm-hmm.
show them that they're worthy of this change,
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think, the beauty of it. And we see it in the evidence. It's there.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to, these old modes that were based on morality and this moral choice, because we didn't understand addiction. This came out of a long history of how we thought about, and we can get into a little bit of philosophy here, how we
Mm-hmm.
thought about human will, what that meant,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that
Yeah.
this was just a moral failing. And so a lot of treatment was based on that, right? And we've
Yeah.
just learned so much. It's just not accurate. It's not correct, right?
Yeah.
It has
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with that. This is about our neurochemistry, our brain, and the way it responds to these addictive chemicals, addictive behaviors, the reward systems. We understand that. And it has nothing to do with morality per se, the choice in
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
but we get stuck
Yeah.
there,
Right.
so.
For sure. Well, we have gone past our time. That what I would say is, I mean, this has been a super rich conversation. I so appreciate your perspective, your lens, and bringing up new ways of knowing through the shame compass. I love that. And do you have like a graph or an image or something that you could share with us?
Absolutely. If people go to the addictedmind.com/shame, they can
Mm-hmm.
download an ebook on the shame compass for free and they can get it. And
Fantastic.
it's a good kind of starting place to do it.
Okay.
So the addictedmind.com/shame.
Fantastic. And we'll put that in the show notes too. That is such a gift. I've learned quite a bit from you today, and I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having
Yeah,
me on.
absolutely. So, if people want to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
I think the best way is just go to theaddictedmind.com. It's the easiest. I have a contact form. If somebody wants to reach out to me, they can reach out to me there. That's fine. I love to hear from people. I love to hear how this works helps them or what help they need.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us on Thrive While Loving an Addict and build some resiliency muscles.
Absolutely. You guys can do it.
Yeah. So, thank you.